if this procedure I'm going to have to clean the blood doesn't work, then I've got probably a few more months to make it before my kidneys shut down. When they shut down, if you can't use dialysis, well, that's the end of the line. So that's kind of why I'm kind of going along with the interview at this time, so that someone out there might read it,
You're seeing that what you went through is just too important for people not to know about.
Yeah.
Is there any information that, for whatever reason, you can't talk with Richard about right now? Is there stuff that's just too close to home that you don't want to put out to the world?
No, not really.
Okay.
I know from my boss's son, he was in the CIA through the 70s and 80s and 90s, that I used to hear from him occasionally. And I know that he told me that in 1979, we had 27 or 29 aliens working in S4 at that time, and other black projects, that something happened, that the whole thing kind of blew up, and they all left, got into a large craft, and they all left and went to the Pleiades star system.
You mean something happened, like there was a altercation,
Yeah,
violence, fight of some
some
sort?
kind of qualification. That they all aliens left and went to the Pleiades, to the dual binary star system that they've got there with the two planets, and that they, ever since that time, that they've been working on exotic crafts there to be brought back here at the time of World War III. So they'll add to what they already built here. They've been there 30 years,
Yeah. I'm wondering if, when you think back to, let's say, your time when you were at S4. I mean, I know I keep coming back to that, but it's just one of those things that is so interesting to me. What was it like, I mean, just physically for you functioning there? I guess I'm asking, what did it look like? Was it impressive? Was there anything that was just, or not? What was it like?
it kind of looked like typical World War II buildings, that they used to make for the bases and for the troops. The building that the alien was in was really built tight so that the oxygen level, they could control the oxygen level.
Did you know how much more oxygen the alien required, by the way?
I don't know what the degrees would be, but it was a little more than, it was the same level that the oxygen is in the two planets that are in the Pleiades system,
Okay.
which is,
Which
we already know were higher than what ours was.
Mm-hmm. Is there another question you wanted to?
Yeah, just dealing with that. Did you ever eat a meal out at Area 51 or S4? Was the food terrible?
Yeah.
Basically, we just had like little snacks. I had some kind of a energy bar of some kind, something like that.
Like a candy bar or energy bar
Yeah,
at S4.
yeah. But they had nothing.
Lavatories pretty standard. Anything different about those?
Well, the lavatories they had taken the doors off all the stools because you couldn't go in any place and be there by yourself. When you went to the bathroom, someone always had to go to the bathroom with you.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not a nice place to work. The ones that were working there.
How was the decor? Was it attractive or just plain?
It was plain. Yes, very plain. But some way they must have almost ran out of white paint because everything was white. Inside now.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever see any like posters on the wall or written words or anything like that?
No, because nothing like that nothing was allowed. You couldn't even have paper tablets or anything like that because, and the people that worked there were treated like the Gestapo would treat people.
This is just a complete bare bones facility.
Yeah.
No decor, no language on the walls, or very little, minimal, no decorations, nothing like that.
No pictures, no nothing.
Is there anything that stands out? Any little detail? Like, for example, what color were the uniforms of the people that were always shadowing you or following you? What did they wear?
Well, some of them that were belonged to the colonel had regular military uniforms on, but no name tags.
Mm-hmm. Was there any other uniforms that were different?
There was a couple that were different, but I took it for granted they were like maintenance men or janitorial work or something.
Ah, okay.
So I don't know what typical military wear was in 1958 when you're out there. What color was it?
Well, it was like camouflage fatigues. Not exactly the way now they have a lighter fatigue.
Right. But maybe similar to what we would have seen in like Vietnam.
Yeah.
That type of a thing, I'm guessing.
Yes.
So,
very good.
So you can't just make a phone call, obviously, in a place like that. Did you see scientists at all?
No, actually I didn't. There was supposed to have been some there, but I didn't see any. I know the movie
Independence Day.
The movie Independence Day.
oh, yes.
Showed
Right, they go to Area 51.
Showed Area 51. That kind of was like the main building in Area 51, with the no corners, everything kind of rounded.
So I remember that was like a really large facility in that movie.
Yes.
Is that kind of what you were experiencing?
Yes.
Something very large?
At that time, Area 51 was basically one floor,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's, after that, in the 60s, it's built way down. I don't know, it's according to some things that I've heard or read,
Mm-hmm.
it's like 6 or 8 floors or something.
Okay.
So I don't know how in the world it did that, still had the building stand.
Right, digging out underneath a pre-existing
Yeah.
structure.
We went, my boss said, let's just do some scouting around, as long as we're here in near the Washington area. So we went he drove us in a old Mercury Grand Marquis to, I think it was a Grand Marquis. Maybe it was called something else that time. But we drove around and we went to this OSS warehouse. And we both had our ID cards. So now, if one person went in, two people couldn't go in through at the same time, or the alarm would sound.
Mm-hmm.
So he went in, door closed, and I opened it up again, and I went in. But so we got into the main storage room, and just looking around at the different labels on the drawers, and didn't see too much of anything interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So we eventually walked further down the aisle with file cabinets on both sides, and there was shelves above the file cabinets, and way up on a shelf about 7 feet tall, I saw a little cardboard box, and the thing said miscellaneous secretarial notes.
Hmm.
And I thought, that's probably nothing, you know. So I took the step stool and got the thing down and looked at it, opened it up, and there was notes in there that the secretary had taken, but nothing of any value.
The secretary, meaning who?
Secretary to whoever she was taking notes for.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but in the bottom of the package, opened up was a brown, heavy cardboard envelope tied up with a string.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that out and loosened the string, opened it up, and looked at it. And I told my boss, I said, I think I got something here. And, well, he says, hope we find something. So he looked through it. I gave it to him. He looked at it, and it was a treaty signed between Germany and the United States. And during the end of World War II in 45 or 46, whatever it was, Germany surrendered to the United States.
Right.
The low-term war. So, in other words, we won the low-term war and lost the high-tech war.
This treaty was signed between Germany and the United States.
Yes.
Do you recall when it was signed?
It was signed in 47.
2 years after the war ended.
Spring of 47.
Do you recall which German officials signed it and which American officials signed it?
Hitler signed it, and there was one of his secretaries, probably the guy that typed, was another witness, you know.
So wait, I want to make sure I got this. So a signature of Hitler as a part of a treaty with the United States in 1947.
Yes,
Who was the American signatory?
it was Admiral Byrd.
Okay.
He
And
signed
what
it.
was the terms of the treaty?
Terms of the treaty was that we surrendered to Germany, but in other words, we lost the high-tech war that we had with them at the South Pole, and that their terms were they would not fly over the United States, Canada, England, or Puerto Rico, or any of our provinces, with their saucer vehicles and whatever other vehicles they had. And our terms were that we would not fly over Argentina, and we would not fly over part of the South Pole that Germany had settled, you know, and organized at that time, which was, I think, like the northwest part of South Pole.
Is that the area they called Neue Schwabenland?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is, however, something concrete to go on. Why did the Allies under Admiral Byrd mount an invasion of the Antarctic?
I would like to say that among the many scenarios, of course, was the reality that there were some 30 missing German submarines that came from Baltic port areas at the close of World War II. These submarine systems had the Walter snorkel system, which allowed them to stay under water for weeks at a time. And this advanced technology made the German U-boats some of the finest in the world at the time, as acknowledged by U.S. naval documents. It is conceivable that some of this advanced technology could have been put on the submarines, spirited out, and with the snorkel system, could have made for Argentinian ports and even the facilities there in Queen Maud or Neues Schwabenland. I say this as a strong possibility, having seen the film that was made in 1947 with Admiral Byrd and Admiral Wood. I had the opportunity to actually see portions of this film, and what struck me was the fact that there was a significant military contingent that went down to Antarctica with Admiral Byrd. Why was it necessary to bring some 4,000 soldiers, a battleship, an aircraft carrier, and a support team to go into an area if it was purely a geological/geophysical exploration? Clearly, there were other unknown factors there, and it was up to the Americans to see if they could acquire this missing technology. That is one scenario.
And that we would help rebuild Europe after the war. The war, of course, was over. Help rebuild Europe. And 2 months later, the Marshall Plan started.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And let's see, there was, trying to think of something else.
Well, let me ask you. You read this treaty. I mean, World War II was the great Allied victory over fascism.
Right.
So now here you are, reading this treaty. How did you and your boss take this?
Well, we were both just, dumbfounded of finding that, saying that. Oh, and by the way, the treaty was typed out on a typewriter that typed fancy script. You could type a regular typewriter.
Mm-hmm.
And then this thing apparently was the only typewriter they had in the U-boat that they could use. And it was a script machine. So it was typed out in like fancy script.
But in English.
Yes.
Mm.
So now, after that, backing up a little bit, according to what Ron brought out yesterday, is towards the end of the war, Hitler flew in a small plane from Berlin to, when they could still get out, to Sweden.
It is known he had a body double.
Yes.
At least during the last few years of the war.
His double was the one that he actually was a little bit screwy, the guy, and he thought he really was Hitler. And so he's the one that committed suicide. And they did such a perfect job on his body double that even copied the fillings in Hitler's teeth so that he would have the very same fillings and bite as what Hitler had.
How did you learn this part of it?
This was my boss's son come out with this. Probably a come out with this later.
That was years
In
later.
the 70s.
All right. So, but at the time, you did learn that there was this treaty,
Yes.
and at the time, did you learn that Hitler had escaped?
Yes.
How did you learn that?
Well, Hitler, again, we were reading the material, and in some of these secretarial notes, whoever was doing this for the guy in charge of FBI,
J. Edgar Hoover.
she had written that Hitler had escaped in a small plane from Berlin to Sweden, and he got on a brand new submarine. And there was a new submarine, kind of a snorkel device. They could swing up and they could go about 25 feet under the water. Still have this snorkel sticking up for air and be able to see what was going on.
Okay.
April 30th, 1945. As Berlin was bombed to bits above him, the most reviled dictator in all of history took his own life. At least, that's what he wants us to think. All-time conspiracy number 2, the death of Adolf Hitler. The official record says Hitler gave his wife Eva a cyanide pill and then shot himself in the head.
When Hitler fell, the Soviets finally reached the bunker where Hitler and his wife had been hiding out. They found a burned body, had been burned with gasoline.
We know that the Soviets said that Hitler's dentist confirmed that it was Hitler's body with the use of his dental records. We really don't know if Hitler truly died or not in that bunker.
Could Hitler have survived the war and lived on? Experts think it's not only possible, it's likely.
Interesting story. U-530 was a Nazi German submarine that shows up in Argentina 2 months after the end of the war with no logs.
U-530 proved that somehow they got out of Nazi Germany. They survived for 2 months at sea. Where did they go? Who did they have on board?
Did Hitler himself somehow get spirited away and end up in Buenos Aires after the war?
Recently declassified communication to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover further inflames speculation.
After Hitler's demise, there were many reports of sightings. The FBI ended up developing an extensive file of these things. The size of the FBI file suggests that the FBI thought that Hitler might be alive.
FBI photographs from after the war depicting an aging Hitler with different facial hair lead many to believe the U.S. knew Hitler didn't die in the bunker.
The evidence was there, and it was coming in from all over the globe that Hitler was being sighted. He lived for possibly years or even decades after the fall of the Third Reich.
So they found a bunch of those later on in Argentina when we started the satellite program, that they photographed them.
Right.
Yeah, Oscar, you'd mentioned that there was a button on Hitler's top coat,
Yes,
that the CIA actually had that button.
yeah. When he got out of the airplane, the top button to his top coat hooked on the springs of the back of the seat in front of him. And it may have been probably a little bit loose already, and it tore the button off.
Mm-hmm. This was a specific button that only
Yeah.
Hitler used.
It was a Führer button. And they found that particular button. But he got away, him and Eva Braun got away by submarine. And they went right over apparently right over northern Scotland and Ireland, came down south of Iceland, and came down by Nova Scotia, and fairly close to the U.S. coast,
Really?
and then came right down around Florida and between Florida and Cuba, and past Cuba and down to Colombia. Ended up in northern Colombia.
Mm-hmm. Did you say previously that Eva Braun did not survive that trip?
No, she apparently had a ruptured appendix or appendicitis, and she died before they got to Colombia.
Right.
And they took her off the plane and off the sub in a stretcher. Took her somewhere.
And Hitler shaved his mustache, I believe you said.
Yeah, his mustache was shaved off. Of course, he had no beard.
Right.
But he looked naturally with no mustache. Looked a little different.
Sure.
What we're used to seeing him. But they headed apparently down to southern Colombia, where there was a German stronghold, and he was there, and we went down with the sub, landed about the same dock in northern Colombia, and troops went down to southern Colombia, and they found Hitler outside drinking probably Colombian coffee with Juan Valdez.
Really?
I'm just kidding about Juan.
Yeah, okay, good.
Little levity there.
I remember Juan Valdez.
On the TV commercials in like the 70s, I think.
He was the guy that always went out and picked coffee beans.
That's right.
By hand. And he would have done wonders if he'd been more mechanically inclined. He always had his donkey. They always picked Colombian coffee. So we always teased each other about that, about Hitler drinking Colombia coffee with Juan Valdez.
So I'm wondering if I can tie this in. First of all, how did you know that whole saga of his trip to Colombia? Was this from your boss at CIA or from records or what?
That was from notes made out to Hoover, or taken from testimony that Hoover had given.
And you saw these in the OSS warehouse?
Yeah, it was in the same box that the treaty was in.
Okay. Now, can we tie this in? I mean, there's a lot of other things to go over regarding ETs, but the last, off the top of my head, German connection I want to know about is how this ties into the Robert Byrd mission and operating high jump.
Yes, I was just getting to that.
This is Robert Montgomery speaking. From the nation's capital has come a new epic of American courage and sacrifice, America's greatest adventure in polar exploration. This is a tale of men and of their willingness to endure hardship and risk life above and beyond the call of duty in the service of country and humanity. For brevity, the sequence of events has occasionally been rearranged. The President's Cabinet approved the expedition. As Secretary of the Navy, James V. Forrestal explains the reasons for the enterprise.
There is only one untouched reservoir of raw materials left in the world, and that's in the region known as Antarctica, an area larger than the combined area of the United States and Europe. The American government is sending a naval expedition to that region. The purpose is to train our Navy in polar operations so that it may better perform its function of preserving the peace upon the 7 seas of the world. Beyond that, the American government is seeking to do its share in the discovery and the release to the world of the unknown treasures of Antarctica in the interests of all mankind.
Thumbs up to this gentleman. The Secretary has approved our plans, confirming you, Admiral Byrd, as the officer in charge of the expedition, and you, Admiral Cruzen, as the task force commander. And we get everything we need. That makes Operation High Jump the greatest polar expedition in history.
Admiral, time is going to be our greatest handicap. By the time we get through this very difficult ice pack, the summer will have ended and the fall will have set in. Never before has anyone attempted to take a fleet of thin-skinned steel ships through 300 miles or more of crushing ice pack.
I have great faith in your skill, courage, and determination. And now, gentlemen,
Admiral Nimitz reviews the operations plan. The expedition will comprise 3 groups: a central land plane group to explore the interior from Little America, and 2 seaplane groups, the eastern to map that half of the continental shoreline, and the western to map the opposite coast of Antarctica. After the original orders have been issued, 3 months of planning are needed to organize the giant venture.
And when they picked Hitler up, they left Juan Valdez there so he could pick the coffee.
There you go.
But they picked up Hitler, brought him onto the U.S. sub, and he offered no resistance of any kind because he already knew that the aliens and Germans had defeated the U.S. apparently. So they went around from Argentina. I went around from Colombia, around South America, and down off the coast of Argentina. And they stopped there, and a German sub came out. And it may have been the same sub that Hitler escaped in, because it was a new type sub with the periscope. Okay, so then when they got there, some officers came off the German sub onto the U.S. sub, and they talked with Hitler and Byrd, and so then they all went into the German sub.
This would be when I'm guessing, this would be when the treaty would have been prepared or signed.
Yes, and the treaty was prepared on the German sub after they all went on to the sub.
All right.
So
then what happened?
So after the Admiral Byrd had his copy and came back on the U.S. sub, and one of the secretaries that was in there with him came out. He's one of the ones that witnessed probably the signing of the treaty. And then they went into the U.S. sub, and Hitler stayed on the German sub, and they broke away the catway and fastened that down to the German sub, and then they backed off and went back towards Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely he was alive. And when Adolf Eichmann, when they captured him in Argentina, the last thing that he said before he was hung was, "Long live Adolf Hitler." And everybody thought, oh, what he means is long live the ideas that Hitler had,
Mm-hmm.
or German 1,000-year period of rule.
Yeah.
But actually, what he probably meant was long live Adolf Hitler, that he was still alive.
In 1960, I think.
67, yeah.
Executed.
Yeah. So, definitely. And after that, he probably went to South America, Antarctica, because Antarctica was their biggest base.
Who probably went to Antarctica? Hitler?
Yeah.
So can you explain the whole purpose of Operation High Jump? What was the purpose of
We
that?
were going to go down. It was set up as a as a scientific mission. But we were going to go down to South America and capture this, what we thought was the last German base.
And that project began in December of 1946.
Yes, probably.
That's what the historical record
Yes.
says. So Byrd was going in to capture German
whatever was
ET.
there.
There was a base in Antarctica that they were apprised of, and they were going to go.
Yeah, underground. It was an underground base.
But this was after, apparently, a treaty was signed, or maybe before the treaty was, probably before the treaty was signed.
This was before this last treaty.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, after the treaty where they surrendered to the U.S. You know,
Exactly, right. So Byrd goes down with his armada.
Yeah, we had a little old flat top aircraft carrier that had half a dozen fighter planes on it and light bombers. And they took off from there, and then there was a big, it was like a cover that opened up, and all of a sudden these saucer craft were flying out of there. And they, of course, were much faster than the U.S. crafts that we had.
I assume the saucer craft had armaments.
Yes, had like a laser type weapon of some kind. And they just circled around and shot these airplanes right down like ducks, you know.
Now, I have two questions. Again, I just want to keep in mind, how did you learn this piece of information?
From the same material that was written down.
All in the OSS warehouse?
Yes.
Okay. And did you learn in that material who was controlling these saucers?
At that time, they had a name for them, and it was Elbarians or something.
Aldebaran?
Aldebarans.
That's a star. That's not the Germans.
No, but that's what they call the particular aliens that were down there.
So it sounds like the Byrd mission didn't necessarily run into the Nazis here, but that they ran into ETs.
Aliens. And then we had troops. Unfortunately, Byrd used a lot of the German troops that we had captured, brought back to the United States, and we used those troops. They wanted to try to capture the Nazis that were down there because they were anti-Nazi, these German troops that were used. So, but we lost just about all of them because of the German Nazi troops coming out and the aerial bombardment that they had. We lost just about all the troops, and the rest of the troops surrendered and stayed down there. The German troops
Oh, so wait, you're saying the Byrd mission brought German troops with them?
Yeah, ones that we had captured and were interned in the United States.
Okay. They go down because they knew there was an advanced base in Antarctica, but it was a ET, not a Nazi base.
Well, it was both.
It was both, because then you said Hitler had been down in Antarctica.
Yeah, we think that he probably went there after Argentina, because the base in Argentina was not really that big. Basically, all we had was half a dozen U-boats that were tied up to docks. And
that's not much of a military force, really, at all.
So he probably went to Antarctica.
So it seems what you're saying or implying is that there was some kind of collaboration between those Nazis and at least some ETs. Am I right in saying that? Or
yes. And they did definitely call him like elderberries.
Aldebaran.
After that, there was a star, but because they had no idea where at that time where they were from, what in the world they were doing with the Nazis.
Well, why do you think they would have called it Aldebaran? Is there any information that you got in your time in the intelligence, the military, that Aldebaran came up?
They had some type of map that showed the star of Aldebaran on it. And he just kind of thought there was probably Earth-like planets going around the star or something.
So regarding all of this information at the OSS warehouse, why were you there to begin with? How did it turn out that you were looking for information in there? Why were you there?
Actually, we were there for no particular reason. We were driving around, and my boss said, let's go hunting, And I said, what do you mean hunting? There's no game around here. No. He said, we're going to hunt in the OSS warehouse, because he was familiar with it, because he had been with the OSS.
You knew there were mysteries in there.
Yes.
You wanted to find out. Is this when you were there to see Eisenhower
Yes.
and Nixon?
It was after one of the meetings. We had 3 different meetings in the Oval Office.
Okay.
With the first 2 with both Eisenhower and Nixon. The last one with just Eisenhower. Because Nixon had to go do something.
I feel bad that I'm jumping around here a little bit, but if we can then just back up. I wonder if we can review those meetings again with Eisenhower and Nixon, if you don't mind. Because I recall in one of them, you met with you, your boss, Eisenhower, and Nixon were all in the room.
Yes.
Were there anyone else in the room at that time?
You talking about the first meeting?
I guess so, yeah. I guess I'm talking
The
about
last meeting, Hoover was with us. But Hoover had a thing about these aliens. It was almost like his pet project that he wanted to find out. He wanted to find out what they were, what they were doing, which he never did.
So that's in the last meeting.
Yeah.
So let me just ask about that. So in the last meeting, it was you, your boss, Eisenhower, and Hoover, but not Nixon.
Yeah.
Did Hoover say anything during that meeting that made you believe he was obsessed with these aliens?
Well, yes, he would ask quite a few questions about, what they look like, so on and so forth. And of course, we went by on the stuff that was written in the interviews.
I want to actually even back up further so we can do this in the proper order. So let's go back to S4. All right. One of the things we didn't talk about enough at S4 was this alien autopsy video.
Oh, okay.
All right. So let's back up there, and then after we talk about that, maybe we can go back to your Bruno. Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. So basically, what I would like to know is how did people refer to the base of Area 51 compared to S4? Who first said it was called S4?
Good point.
The first time I heard about it was when we were getting on the bus to go to S4, and the colonel said, we're going to take a short ride, about 20 minutes or so, to another smaller base, S4, where we've got a lot of the crafts and this type of thing. Rod Roswell craft is in storage there, and so on. That was the first time that I heard S4.
Am I right in thinking from another statement you had made previously that the whole reason you were going to S4 to begin with was for your work
Yes.
in helping you? Why were they bringing you there? What was the point?
That we were supposed to see the, Area 51 facility and whatever might be around it.
Well, Eisenhower wanted you to go in to get
Yes.
answers, but was there any other reason you needed to go there?
Not really.
Okay, I thought I'd heard you say because in your job you needed to see the real thing, so that in analysis you would be able to differentiate what was real and what was hoax. Am I mistaken about that?
Well, yes, I guess you could say that. Because we had to. He took the real thing that we wanted to go see really was the Roswell craft.
Did they call it the Roswell craft at that
Yes.
time?
The colonel called it the craft that crash landed at Roswell.
Okay.
So yes, he did.
All right, so we'll jump into the film you were shown, because we've already discussed the other part where you. Well, actually, hey, before we get to the film, you saw the craft, and you saw the live the live alien. Can I ask you about that one more time?
Yes.
All right. So you're in with. Who are you with when you're seeing this live alien?
Well, my boss was right out there with me.
Yes.
And basically, we had another party from the CIA that we met up with at Nellis Air Base, who came out with us.
Okay.
And he was working in Western United States on the various, trying to get information on black projects that were starting to be developed.
All right.
Underground. So, but there was the two of us, three of us, and we looked through the window and saw the alien. Yes.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that the two agents and your boss went in the room. You stood outside because you thought it was a demon.
Yes.
That's what I remember in your other memoir.
Yes.
You thought this was a demon, not an alien? Or?
I didn't know anything really about aliens. So I thought, well, it must be a demon manifested as an alien.
Okay.
In fact, my boss asked him the question, are you a demon, It seemed to upset him.
It seemed to upset the alien.
The alien, that like the demons were much lower than what they were or something.
Like an insult.
Yeah. I've been insulted. I've been called a demon. But, yeah, it was.
How were the communications taking place? Did you say this alien spoke, or was it a telepathic thing, or how did that
The
go?
alien could speak, but only the person that he was speaking to at that particular time, or answering a question, only that person could hear him.
How was that so? It was just in their mind somehow?
I have no idea, but he would just talk to one individual at a time.
But you had said before that they could hear the alien in their mind, and they didn't know how that happened. So they covered their ears. One of the agents covered his ears to see if it was auditory or whether it was mental.
Yes.
Is that something that you had witnessed?
Yeah, it was that situation, but the alien could communicate, and he had perfect English. It's really something, because my boss said that whoever interviewed him last was somebody with a southern accent. So the alien picked that up and was speaking to him with a southern accent.
Interesting. What were some of the questions asked, and what were some of the answers that this alien gave?
basically, they asked him how long he had been there, but he wouldn't answer the question.
Okay.
He never answered. And boy, I wish I had my whole original notes.
Any other questions you can remember? I'm guessing someone might have asked, like, why are you here, or what are you doing here? Was anything like
They
that?
asked him, why don't you, as the alien that Truman interviewed, could disappear, and he disappeared, why can't you disappear? And he says, I'm locked into the situation being a humanoid, and I can no longer go back to a spirit being. So he was locked in to a humanoid. And he said, why are you locked in? Because he says, when we're all through with the jobs that we have to do, we will be killed.
They're just disposable units, sounds like?
We can die. In humanoid form, we can be killed. Spirit form, of course, you couldn't be killed. But humanoid, they could.
Was this ET, in your opinion, fully biological or also biological mechanical?
Biological, I would say. I don't think he was mechanical.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
You had mentioned about they thought that there was some cloning done, but that they could replace their knowledge into a new body. Did you address that issue?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where I think I read that in some of the notes that we read where they had alien interviews, and it mentioned that if the body, something was wrong with the body, they could transfer their cells to a new, what they call, new body, what they call new container.
They use the word container.
Yeah.
And those are not in the direct interview, but in the notes that you and your boss read a little later.
Yeah.
Containers. Yeah, that's the word that's come up.
Linda Moulton Howe wrote in her book about ETs called transferring, calling bodies containers.
Yeah, they did. So, interview with this ET, this alien. Anything else you remember from that? Those questions and answers?
I really don't think so.
Okay.
It was very short. In other words, they were kind of finishing up the interview. Right.
You know, one of the things you had mentioned before in your memoirs was that there was information that the aliens were mining uranium on the border of France and Germany, and that there was the mining was done without any support material. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, that was, the mining that they were doing was way back anciently.
Was this in the interview or in your notes that you read later?
That was in notes.
Okay, so can you describe that?
Yeah, it mentioned that they were in Europe and mining for uranium, and that they were using laser saws to cut away the walls of the mines.
Could they tell how old these mines were?
I think several thousands of years old. Yeah, and at that time they were getting uranium to start using in their crafts.
They wanted uranium. They had apparently very advanced technology to cut through.
Yes.
Here. So these were mines that didn't look like contemporary mines that we would make.
The walls were very sheer, compared to what our mining would be with some kind of air guns or drills or something.
Well, I'm wondering why people didn't find these mines earlier. How was it that they were so secret?
Because it was a radioactive situation. And government had put the kibosh on anybody going near that particular.
I'm just thinking even in the 19th century or earlier, between France and Germany, it's very populated.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering why it hadn't been found.
As far as I know, it could have been found, but whoever found it might have died of radiation.
Okay.
Yes, I was.
Because you'd mentioned that they actually found a craft in there that was atomic powered.
Oh, that's right, yeah. They went into this one room, kind of broke through, and they found this atomic old saucer craft that was atomic powered, which was entirely different from their technology.
Any idea in the notes when this mine was discovered and when this craft was discovered?
Probably discovered in I would say in the 20s.
That
Most
early?
likely, yeah.
It just would have been kept quiet. Who would have discovered it? Germans?
Probably.
I'm thinking.
Because they were looking for various things. They were looking for atomic energy.
Which do you do first, eat or insulin?
Let's eat.
You guys want to order something?
I need to take
we can order
my
something in
insulin
here.
reading, so I need a blue bag.
The various corroborative video clips used in this film were excerpted from contemporary TV programs. In Agent Stein's 1998 testimony to UFO researcher Linda Moulton Howe, he goes into great detail about how he spent many hours with his CIA station chief boss in the super-secret CIA, formerly OSS, archive building in Langley, Virginia. They were very diligent when preparing the briefing documents that would be presented to President Eisenhower in the Oval Office. Stein explains to Stargate cameras that his discovery of all this super-secret information took place in 1958 and 59. The current media research people are just now catching up with these secrets that Stein uncovered over 53 years ago. That is why we are including these important corroborative segments in this film. The point to be made here that some of the secrets include 1. Super-secret documents signed by the U.S. government and representatives of the Nazi government after the war in 1947, basically treaties that committed the U.S. government not to challenge various high government organizations residing in various South American countries, as well as the U.S. government's commitment to rebuild Europe, eventually called the Marshall Plan. 2. Documents proving that Hitler did not die in the bunker, but rather was spirited away to South America via German submarines. 3. He explains the reason for Operation High Jump as an expedition by Admiral Byrd to conquer a secret German base called New Schwabenland in Antarctica, beginning in December 1946. 4. Revelations concerning various occult societies within Germany, called the Vril, Black Sun, and Thule societies, whose trance mediums had the ability to channel off-world entities, thereby instructing, including detailed diagrams, which were given to German scientists on how to construct disc-shaped anti-gravity machines. Other revelations include detailed accounts of autopsy films showing the interior of the alien's brain, called branch brains, which with the use of special headbands, the EBEs could control and maneuver their respective spacecrafts. He explains the reasons for the untimely death of Secretary James Forrestal during the Truman administration. The list is long and extensive, and is explored in the companion book called Whistleblowers at Area 51.
We walked out, we went to another building probably about half a block away, and went into this building. And then the colonel said, what we've got in here is we're interviewing a gray alien.
All right, right there. How did you feel at that moment?
Well, I thought, boy, we had no idea we were going to see the real thing. All we saw was film.
You had to have a little bit of heart racing at that moment.
And they said we can't go into the interview room because they have the oxygen level real high for the alien. And we can't disturb that by opening a door and going in.
Okay.
So we looked through a window and we saw the gray sitting behind a little table, real low table. And they were asking him, different questions.
What did this gray alien look like? Could you describe him a little bit?
This one looked a little bit oriental.
So almost like a human.
Yes, a little bit.
Could you see eyes, pupils, whites in the eye? Anything like that?
Now, one thing that the colonel told us too is that the real tiny little aliens that are about 2.5 feet tall, that they aren't aliens, that they're mechanical devices that the aliens have built and used to do various jobs.
Artificial life forms in some way.
Artificial.
So I'm just wondering if it looked almost human, what about this didn't look human?
No, it didn't look human as far as the skin tone and basically the shape of it and the size.
How was its head size compared with a normal human, for example?
Brain was kind of a little bit bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them...
Nose, mouth, ears, what about those?
Nose was very, very small. And the ears were just like holes.
Okay. Mouth?
Mouth was very small. Because they don't need to eat. They don't eat at all.
How do they get their nutrition?
They're self-sustaining. They, just like when you go deer hunting and you shoot a deer and you find around the outside of this deer you find all this tallow. And these aliens, underneath their skin, build up this almost like a tallow. And then they feed off this tallow, this material. It isn't really tallow, but they feed off of that so they don't need to eat. And they can eat. It is possible for them to eat, but that they don't have to.
So you're in this room, there's, what is it, like a glass divider,
Yes,
basically?
glass. I'm looking through it, through glass,
What happened then?
Then we stayed there until they were basically through. They took the alien out to another room.
What was the alien doing? I mean, did they bring you just to observe, or was there any kind of communication going on?
No communication with us. But later on, my boss was able to go in and had a partial interview with her.
Now, why were they bringing you out here at all, anyway, to see an alien? What was the point?
To go back and tell the president they actually had one.
So he did not know at this point if there was an alien at S4.
No. Because basically, they fed him nothing but genuine BS. And they didn't know. He never did. We told him why that the black program was going to build the U.S. forces up with a proper air force. But we also told him that the guys were building exotic crafts for World War III to be used against us. And so he was the first president that actually knew that. So, 1947, Truman okayed the situation with the Majestic 12 that we build our program and build World War III exotics for the United States of Europe.
So these new craft were going to be used against whom? The Soviets or the aliens?
These new crafts they were building used against us.
Who was building these new crafts?
They were.
So the U.S. was building these crafts to be used against
us.
I don't understand.
Yes. Originally when MJ-12 was set up, they talked to Harry Truman and they said, we want to build crafts for the United States and want to build crafts for the future, so on and so forth. And he okayed it that, in 65 years, he would be dead anyway, and all the members of his family probably be dead. So he didn't really care if they were used against the United States or not. So.
Joint Chiefs of Staff talk to you or concern you about the unknown and the unidentified flying object?
Oh, yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military, and they never were able to make me a concrete report on.
Do you have anything on the subject, sir?
No, I haven't anything on the subject, and there's always things like that going on, flying saucers.
But what I don't really understand is why would the United States be building these exotic crafts to be used against itself? That's what I'm getting from you, but I don't understand why it is. Wouldn't they be using it against the Russians? Wouldn't they be using it against hostile aliens if that were the case?
Well, they couldn't build things in Russia because of the type of governments that they have. They couldn't build it in Europe because it's where they needed it because of Europe's being watched so close. So we monitor Europe today so that they won't develop any offensive weapons, just defensive weapons. That's why in the war with Libya, we had to furnish them with tankers to supply their jets with fuel. And because they had none, because that would be an offensive weapon. So the only place left would be to build it in like South America or the United States. So with the black program going, it was the ideal place for them to blend it in with the black program.
So the alien was in the room, the Gray was there. He gets let out. And then what happened after this?
Then we he mentioned that some of the things, the archives that they had, and he knew that we both had high security clearance, so he brought us into the room, and we both started reading.
That's the colonel who brought you in?
Yes.
Still leading it? Okay.
Both started reading interviews that they had. At that time, we had interviews with the alien that President Truman interviewed. Now, President Truman flew out to Columbus, Ohio, I believe it was, and interviewed this one alien that survived.
The alien wasn't able to speak, I assume, or was it?
Yes, he was able to speak, and they can speak any language as long as you start speaking, and they pick up your language that you have. They have some kind of a translator that they can pick up on any language.
So this wasn't some kind of telepathic thing. This was actually using sound.
Yes.
Okay.
And
what was the nature of the interview? What was
Truman asked him, it looks like you have tremendous advanced technology. You certainly could attack us right now and defeat us, And the alien said, yes, he said that probably would be true, but we can only go when and where God allows. Only when and where God allows. So that's what he had mentioned at that time.
And this is the transcript you're reading?
Yes.
Okay. What else was discussed?
And then he said, well, Truman said, well, how long do we have, And he said, you have 50 years plus a decade or so.
And then he said, how long do we have? What did he mean?
Until World War III. 50 years plus a decade or so.
Well,
so
this
that
is
was
the late 40s.
47. This was...
roughly to 2000 plus a decade or so.
Yeah, it was 1997 plus a decade, 2007. 2 decades would be 2017.
Right.
So it's short of that. So it's somewhere in before 2017.
For World War III.
Yes.
Anything else you remember from the interview?
Baby Truman was kind of shocked. And he kind of pushed the whole thing off as being, well, that would be at least 65, going on 70 years. Everybody in my family would be dead,
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be dead. So that's how the time limit started with the black programs.
What do you mean by time limit with black programs?
Things they had to complete.
They had to get them done fast.
Yes. So that time we started building these exotic crafts like crazy. These larger triangular crafts, larger saucer crafts.
Let me ask you this question. When he's talking about World War III, what does that mean? Fighting who? Aliens?
Well,
some other country?
The country hasn't been developed yet. The country is the United States of Europe, and it would be 10 nations.
So it would be a war between the United States and Europe.
Yes.
A unified Europe.
Be a revision from the old German situation, with them losing 2 wars, and now they hope to finally win one.
Okay. What else did you read in this room or the materials that you were given?
Different materials that the aliens came out with. Now the aliens some of them were just bald-faced liars, just told terrible lies. And one of them interviewed said that 20,000 years ago, we helped by regulating the genes in an upright ape, making it walk upright, and like they invented man. So, which was, total BS. But,
I might think that'd be a lot more than 20,000 years ago anyway.
Yeah, well, that's part of the big BS story, But other they all more or less told stories as far as where they were from, and it was all from different galaxies far, far away.
So we're talking about many different alien groups
Yes.
that have been written about in these briefing papers.
Yes,
Any idea how many different groups you discerned in that?
probably 3 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah, they were, as we know them today, as Nordics, blonde aliens who are about 5 foot something tall. In fact, looking from the rear, you think it was a human until you see their eyes.
What's different about the eyes?
They have eyes like a cat with a long slit.
A vertical slit.
Yes, where you don't see that. Now some of the little aliens don't have that, but those particular Nordics did. But the Nordic interview was interesting because it said that they had a job to do, but didn't do the job, and wanted to build a nation of their own because they were one of the 2 families of aliens that were male and female. All the aliens were neutral except for a couple of groups.
So these Nordics basically reproduced.
Yes.
They had sexual relations, and
yes.
Whereas the gray aliens presumably did not.
No.
Yeah.
And
so the Nordics wanted to create like a nation on Earth. They wanted to have
Yes.
a North country.
So they went over to south of Greece by, I can't think of the Greek island now. Santorini. Yes. And they wanted to build an island because they wanted to isolate themselves from humans, So
Nice weather there for sure.
They built
That's a good place to go.
Beautiful city, nice city. Lived there for a couple hundred years. And unfortunately, they had built on a caldera of an ancient volcano.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a massive earthquake, and this volcano blew the whole city.
Yeah.
20-some thousand feet high. And killed all the offspring. Now the offspring all died because they couldn't change back to spirit beings that they were, like the parents were.
So presumably after that explosion, in fact, I think this is, am I right in thinking it's the explosion of Mount Dara, which was thousands of years ago?
Yeah, about 16, around something like 1600 BC.
Yeah, exactly. So they survived on Earth and they continued in some way to maintain themselves?
Yes, the Nordics survived.
And all of this was what you read in your briefing?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, it's kind of earth-shocking. And, you have a program on the History Channel of ancient aliens.
Right.
And really it's kind of semi-accurate because the ancient aliens were these beings that, alien beings, as we know them, that were survivors over the years, and they helped the different nations. Just like the one interview I read was the aliens that helped build the Great Pyramid, helped Egyptians build the Great Pyramid.
Now this information was obtained through interviews with aliens?
Yes.
So basically we had to trust that they're telling us the truth, but I assume that they believe these beings.
And they said that they helped the Egyptians build a Great Pyramid. And we've always thought that they built a sand ramp up to the very top. But they didn't do that at all. They built it from the inside out. They built hallways, first corner of 30 degrees, to the second corner, 3rd degrees up to the 3rd corner, and up to the 4th corner.
Now, these briefing documents would be a rather interesting thing to introduce to the rest of the world, I would think.
Yes,
It would turn everything upside down.
it would, but they probably were all burned. Because back in those days, when they didn't have computers, if you had something classified, they burned everything. Just like all of my CIA records and military records were all burned, all destroyed.
So after you went through these briefing documents, what did you do then at Area? Were you done, or did you have other things to do with
Yes, so
S4?
basically we were kind of done. Went back to Area 51.
Mm-hmm.
They took us into the main building. And there we saw a U-2, which of course we didn't know existed.
Mm-hmm.
And a model of the SR-71.
Yeah, the Blackbird.
So, but like I mentioned earlier, it was not a model of the current Blackbird.
It was an earlier version.
But an early version.
Now, is this the time when you... Now, how did you go... Did you go directly to Washington after this?
Yes.
Or did you go somewhere else? How did they get... Did you fly regular airline? Or?
We flew back to the commuter plane back to the air base,
Mm-hmm.
and then took President Eisenhower's Lockheed Electra back to Washington.
You and your supervisor,
Yeah.
superior officer, and now you're meeting with the president?
Yes.
Can you describe this?
Well, we met with him in the second story of the old OSS warehouse building. And Eisenhower and Nixon were there. And also that guy head of the FBI.
Hoover?
Hoover was there. And so everything was completely off limits. There was no press or nothing. Nobody knew that Eisenhower was there. He was supposed to be in bed, you know.
Okay.
So he asked us what was going on, and we told him about the alien and the whole situation, and the black projects and so on. And he was just totally shocked that they were going to be building a program for World War III, as well as building things for ourselves. So,
you said to Richard that you gave them kind of like the bogus story. You didn't give them the juicy stuff, you know? So when you're telling them this now, is it that you personally knew stuff that you were told not to tell the president, or you could freely tell him everything you know because you didn't know the juicy stuff? You see what I'm saying?
Not exactly.
Okay, so he had said to you that he was told to give kind of a bogus report to the president. Is that correct?
No, he was told by the president to get the information out of there and report back.
So you're just telling the facts as you know it to the president?
yes.
And what was his level of understanding prior to that? Was he totally shocked?
Well, the president didn't know that there was an alien there.
No, he didn't know there was an alien there. He had no idea that we were building exotics for some other country. No idea. So, and
Now, I still want to make sure I'm understanding this. We were in S4. They were building or testing exotic technology for, you say, some other country.
yes,
But the question is, what other country? Europe?
it would be Europe, yes.
So they were building weapons that were going to be used by a united Europe against the United States?
Yes,
Okay, I wanted to make sure I understood you.
yes,
So that's what you're saying. So you're meeting with Eisenhower and Nixon?
yes. Nixon was just, he was paranoid anyway. And when he found all this out, he just got so nervous he had to leave the room. So he just couldn't understand what in the world was happening.
So you told Eisenhower, I'm assuming, that there was a live alien there.
Yes,
How did he react to this?
he was shocked. He knew that they had picked up aliens, but he had no idea that they can fly off somewhere. You know, leave.
But the aliens could leave?
Yeah,
Was this alien able just to leave at will?
the one that Truman interviewed was able to disappear. They had him in like a little cage.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden he was gone. And Truman said, boy, not only do they have advanced weapons, but they could appear and disappear. He said, boy, we're in for a real fight if we get into war with these aliens, you know.
So now you're with Eisenhower and you're telling him there's an alien there. And did he say anything that you can remember?
Yeah, he was, besides being surprised, he appeared for the first time to be worried.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like he was worried. And he said, well, you two guys really did a job. He said, we've got nothing but BS from MJ-12 from 1947 till now, you know. We knew about the U-2 too, but that's the only thing that we knew about, you know. And we told him about the upcoming SR-71 thing could fly 3,500 miles an hour.
He had not known about that?
No.
That was new also.
Brand new.
I would think that Eisenhower he certainly knew that flying saucers were real.
Yes.
He knew that there were aliens. So I guess I'm just wondering, what would he have been, really surprised about?
Surprised about the black programs. See, when the black programs started out, MJ-12, the guys were picked from business, from military, from science, and only one didn't go along with the whole thing, and that was the Secretary of War, I believe it was.
Defense. You're talking about James Forrestal?
Yeah, Forrestal. He did not go along with it because it was going to be part of the stuff they were doing was going to be for destruction of the United States. So it bothered him so bad, he ended up with a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
And he was taken to Walter Reed Hospital, and he kind of recovered. They brought him back to his office, and he got worse and worse again. And he came into his office one day, and he was looking at the blank wall, and he was saying, I am a loyal fellow.
Yeah.
I am a loyal fellow. And in other words, he would not go along with the destruction of the United States. So, but he was the only one. The rest of them all went along with it.
Well, and then not long after that, of course, his life ended with a 16th floor fall out of the Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Yeah. Well, here's another thing. When he fell out of the hospital, he had a robe on because he came from his room into this room, and someone had tied the end of a tie for his robe around his neck.
Did you read all of this when you were in the Army or with the CIA?
I heard about Forrestal from my boss, who heard from another CIA fellow at that time.
So it was talked kind of at a quiet level.
Yes.
That Forrestal was murdered. He didn't commit suicide.
Yes. And they tied this thing around his neck, and they put him foot first out this kind of a high window, and held him there, and he had scratched into the windowsill with his fingers, trying to hold on.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked him one more time, will you go along with us? And to build these weapons, you know. And he thought for a little while, he said no, and let him fall.
Now the question is, how did you learn that part?
That was from fell on the CIA.
James Forrestal was a man whose presence and policies dominated the news from 1940 until 1949, but excluding a handful of noteworthy exceptions, has effectively been written out of history books and the national consciousness. How was this man connected to the legitimate UFO-related national security concerns of the Truman White House? And did he take his own life, or was it taken from him? If we are to believe the official account, early on the morning of May 22nd, 1949, James Forrestal fell to his death from the 16th floor window of the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, where he was being treated for depression. But this account doesn't hold up under scrutiny. While the evidence at hand is varied and compelling, it is all circumstantial right now. Nonetheless, it points toward murder. Forrestal's death was precipitated by a profound nervous breakdown, brought on, no doubt, by combined factors. He was a complex, driven individual who, over the years, shouldered tremendous responsibilities during some of the 20th century's most decisive moments, this as his private life grew more and more hollow. Rewrites. I have been looking into this incident and the events surrounding Mr. Forrestal's death for some time now, and have become convinced that a central factor in his emotional collapse had to do with the unique gravity of a situation he inherited on September 17, 1947, when he was sworn in as our first Secretary of Defense. But before looking at this, or into the circumstances surrounding his death, it's important that we have some sense of who this man was and what he had achieved in his life. James Vincent Forrestal was born in 1892 in the village of Beacon, New York, in Dutchess County. His father was a contractor active in local Democratic politics, and his mother was a lay teacher at a local Catholic school. In 1911, James was accepted to Dartmouth College, and the following year transferred to Princeton. He was editor of the Daily Princetonian and trained to be a competitive boxer. In fact, it was while at Princeton, in an amateur match, his nose was broken. And given the choice of having it set or not, he chose not to. Why? He thought it made him look tougher. And you know what? It really did. In his yearbook, he was referred to rather prophetically as the man no one knows. Forrestal left Princeton 3 weeks before graduating to join the Wall Street brokerage firm of Douglas Dillon. But with war raging in Europe, he enlisted in the Navy in 1916. The armistice precluded his seeking service, and he returned to the employee of Douglas Dillon in New York, and in 1923 was made a partner. In 1923, on Dillon's death, he was made president. It was also in 1926 that he married the beautiful but emotionally troubled Josephine Ogden, who was a former Ziegfeld showgirl and an editor at Vogue magazine. As their life together progressed, and this is nothing I'm saying is confabulated, the best scholars that I've read on this subject feel that Mrs. Forrestal was probably schizophrenic. There is no question that she became a hardcore alcoholic as their marriage disintegrated. As the 1920s roared on, James Forrestal's life genuinely came to parallel that of the great Gatsby's Jay Gatsby. The boy from the quiet upstate town was now a full-fledged member of New York society and one of the Wall Street elite, whose pals included the writers Dorothy Parker, Robert Benchley, and the actor Gary Cooper. Over the next dozen years, while most of America struggled through the Depression, James Forrestal made a tremendous success of himself on Wall Street. One of Forrestal's mentors as a young banker was a gentleman named Ferdinand Eberstadt, one of the legendary names in Wall Street banking. Eberstadt was already working as an advisor to President Roosevelt, and he brought up his young protege's considerable talents to the president. Roosevelt, in 1937, invited Forrestal essentially, to give up his business life, to move to Washington, and to become part of an informal advisory group of business leaders that were referred to alternatingly as the kitchen cabinet or the $1-a-year men, because in fact, these individuals gave up very high-paying careers to move to Washington, pay all the expenses, their own expenses, be at the disposal and service of the President of the United States at any time, night or day, and were paid $1-a-year for this service. Forrestal was appointed Undersecretary of Navy in 1940 and was soon directing and overseeing the manufacture and flow of all the Navy's war needs, a staggering job by any standard. By all accounts, though, he did a superb job and seemed to thrive in the ultra-high-stress atmosphere. When Navy Secretary Frank Knox died during the war of a heart attack, Roosevelt had Forrestal sworn in as our new Secretary of Defense. It was also in 1940 that Forrestal began keeping a diary, which he kept for the next 9 years, right up until the beginning of 1949, a very short time before he was institutionalized. These entries, which it wasn't, a nice little diary with a lock on it. He was a workaholic, type A character. He'd finish up work usually at night at the Pentagon at about 8 o'clock or so. Then he'd have a naval secretary come in and he would dictate to him everything that had happened during the course of the day. This included everyone he met with, the contents of every meeting he attended. No desk jockey or poseur, the Navy Secretary put himself in harm's way more than once during the war and probably drove his underlings crazy. He was present during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and the invasion of Normandy. Can you imagine a modern cabinet official doing this? He was not assigned to do it. He wanted to be there with the men. July 6, New York Times reported that the flying saucer, of course, was only a crashed weather balloon, and so begins the mythology of trying to make Roswell look like it never happened. Now, later in June, on the 26th, the National Security Act was passed by Congress, and the President immediately named Forrestal as the new Secretary of Defense, but he was not sworn in. Passage of the act also brought into existence that month the National Security Council, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Central Intelligence Agency, and Vannevar Bush's Research and Development Board. Quite a month in American history. Now, on September 17th, not long after, en route by battleship from a state visit to Brazil, President Truman sent an urgent message to Washington ordering that James Forrestal be sworn in as Secretary of Defense, and immediately. And Chief Justice Fred Vinson swore him in that afternoon. Former Vice President and presidential candidate Henry Wallace absolutely commanded the press the next day in that he was genuinely shocked by the suddenness of the president's decision and insisted, quote, "If there is a genuine emergency, the people have a right to an explanation. If there is no emergency, this action rates as a very lowest method of breeding fear." Was there an emergency? And if so, what was it? While its provenance is considered controversial by many, the MJ-12 document dated September 19th supplied the requisite emergency. It was titled, quote, "Examination of Unidentified Disc-like Aircraft Near Military Installation in the State of New Mexico." Now, if you have any problem with MJ-12, no problem. 3 days later, on September 23rd, an uncontested document was put forward. This was a top-secret document, and it is absolutely gilt-edged. It's one of the seminal documents of the authentic, many thousands of pages now, that have been released either through Freedom of Information Acts or the natural process of attrition and natural declassification and simply quietly filing. The document was Air Materiel Command Opinion Concerning Flying Discs. And it was written by General Nathan M. Twining, who went on to become a head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In it, Twining states unequivocally, quote, "The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious." That same day, Forrestal checks into his office for the first time. Some of you are familiar with the so-called Eisenhower briefing document, the 8-page document that was the very first of the MJ papers, and of them, it is considered the least controversial. There was also a 9th page, a 1-page attachment. On that document, James Forrestal is listed as MJ12, number 3. The briefing document came with, again, a 1-page attachment that authorized the new Secretary of Defense, White House stationery, Truman's signature, everything seems kosher, to proceed, quote, with all due speed and caution on your undertaking. On September 27th, 2 days later, Forrestal issued his very first directive as the new Secretary of Defense, and the United States Air Force was activated. This period of summer and autumn of 1947, for me, is actually the most intriguing several months in post-war history, as far as what's getting under the radar for most folks, and a terribly interesting period of time to study if you're interested in any way in American history. On September 30th, a photograph is taken of James Forrestal shaking hands with Vannevar Bush. Dr. Vannevar Bush, also probably one of the most impelling and fascinating characters of the 20th century that most folks have never heard of. If you go to Who's Who of, say, 1955, he has a full 2.5 pages. This was a former head of the board of AT&T, former dean of MIT, who held something like 200 separate patents. He was Roosevelt's primary, singular head scientific advisor through the war, and he went on to continue the job under Forrestal, and became a sore point for the president, who refused to see his Secretary of Defense for several weeks following the election, making Forrestal sad and unhappy. When they finally did meet again, it was around Thanksgiving at what was called the Little White House then. Truman had a retreat in Key West, Florida. And there's a famous publicity shot of them taking pictures on the front lawn, shaking hands and smiling, but it was just a publicity shot. James Forrestal's star was in descent at the White House. On January 1st, 1931, an FBI memo entitled Protection of Vital Installations by J. Edgar Hoover noted the following, that in the matter of flying discs, it is considered top secret by intelligence officials of both the Army and the Air Forces. On January 31st of 1949, same day, the Air Force Chief of Staff and Director of Special Investigations received a message from Kirkland Air Force Base saying in part that the Atomic Energy Commission, Air Force officials, and 4th Army local commanders were all, quote unquote, perturbed by implications of the phenomena. I love military understatements like that. February of 1949, this was a month that Forrestal joined with the president in off-the-record White House luncheons on the 8th, the 14th, and the 23rd. On the 16th of February, the Los Alamos National Laboratories had a meeting, a classified conference, on the subject of the flying disc problem. Also that February, the Air Force distributed the secret Project Sign, its most extensive technical report on the matter of these unknown aerial phenomena to date. This brings us up to James Forrestal's breakdown. On March 28th, the day of his retirement, the Secretary joined Defense Department employees assembled to see Lewis Johnson sworn in as the new Secretary of Defense. Here, the President presented the retiring Secretary with the Distinguished Service Medal, which is the highest decoration that can be awarded to a civilian. Forrestal took the podium and tried to express his gratitude, but could only say, "It's beyond my," and then went silent. The President, pinning the medal on his lapel, said, "You deserve it, Jim." Now, Clark Clifford, a name some of you might recognize because, although he was a young man and a protege of Forrestal's at the Pentagon at the time, went on to become an Attorney General of the United States, in his memoirs remembered, quote, "Unable to respond to the President's gracious words of praise, Forrestal is led speechless from the room. It was suddenly apparent to everyone there that something was terribly wrong." Following the change of command ceremonies, Air Force Secretary Stuart Symington, who had regularly challenged Forrestal's authority, was overheard saying to him, quote, "There is something I would like to talk to you about." Now, while there is no record of what Symington actually said to Forrestal in the following conversation, which they had in private, there is no doubt that the effect on Forrestal was deeply upsetting, if not traumatic. He was found several hours later, sitting in his office in the Pentagon, which he was going to vacate that day, staring blankly at the wall, repeating to himself, "You are a loyal fellow. You are a loyal fellow. You are a loyal fellow." Once outside of the Pentagon building itself, Forrestal appeared dazed and bewildered. A shocked aide arranged for Vannevar Bush's chauffeur to drive him back to his Georgetown home. Once there, Forrestal called Ferdinand Eberstadt, who came right over. Eberstadt was taken aback at his friend's manner and his haggard look, even though he had looked fine several days before. It seemed the secretary was also convinced and confided to Eberstadt, one of his closest colleagues and mentors, that certain persons in the White House had formed a conspiracy to get him and had finally succeeded. These updates were coming around the clock every 15 minutes. When he checked the room 5 minutes later, at 1:50, it was empty, and a search was immediately commenced. 2 to 3 minutes later, a duty nurse on the 7th floor reported hearing a loud sound from a window. It was James Forrestal's body hitting the 3rd floor roof.
There is another intriguing coincidence. In March 1949, Defense Secretary James Forrestal, a supposed member of the Majestic 12, resigns from President Truman's cabinet. In April, he is admitted into Bethesda Naval Hospital for treatment for mental illness. On May 22, 1949, 7 weeks after checking in, Forrestal plunges to his death from a window on the hospital's 16th floor. The official cause of death is suicide, but Forrestal's fall has long been the subject of speculation.
I don't think we'll ever know the true story of what happened. The theories are many. He was pushed out, he was tossed out. They decided he was going to talk about things he shouldn't be talking about.
Hospital authorities surmised that the patient, finding his door unlocked, simply stopped writing, stood up, walked across the hall to the efficiency kitchen, pushed open the unsecured screen window, took off his bathrobe sash, double knotted it around his neck, then tied the other end to the radiator below the window, then lowered himself out the window and was killed when the sash slipped from its mooring. May 22nd, there was a brief article in the New York Times in the late edition that the secretary had killed himself. But on May 23rd, his death was front page news in every newspaper in the United States and in England and in many other parts of the world. The lead article in the Times on the 23rd was entitled Forrestal, a Suicide at Naval Hospital, and a follow-up article was Forrestal's Leap Laid to Depression. In this article, Captain Rains, who was again head of neuropsychiatry at Bethesda and his acting psychiatrist, because the real one never came back, was quoted as saying that the former secretary took his life in a sudden fit of despondency, extremely common to the severe type of mental depression he suffered. The next day, with over 6,000 people in attendance, James Forrestal was laid to rest at Bethesda National Cemetery. He had a 19-howitzer salute. The president read the eulogy. He was 57 years old. The Naval Medical Board finished its hearings on May 30th, having seen fit to conclude its investigation after only 7 days. It was on this day that the public first learned of Forrestal's diary and that it was being held still at the White House. It was described at the time as filling an entire filing cabinet and accompanied by numerous secret and top-secret classified documents. The sea change in Forrestal's behavior can in fact be traced directly to the autumn or winter of 1947. In late 1949, columnist Drew Pearson, again an avowed enemy of Forrestal's, wrote, "The Defense Secretary's nervous deterioration dated back over 2 years. Both observations, one from a good friend, the other from an outspoken enemy, suggest Forrestal's mental problems began on or about the time he was sworn in as Secretary of Defense in September of 1947. But the Times characterized the book as a wealth of observations made just prior to and just after World War II by a man who, aside from standing at the center of great events, was acknowledged to be an accurate observer of the history of his time. Concerning MJ-12, I should go on record here as saying I do feel that MJ-12 genuinely was a real organization and may well be in effect under a same or very possibly a different acronym. But it has not in any way been my intention here to prove or disprove the veracity of MJ-12 related documents. But the few I have referenced do dovetail with the known time frame and the known whereabouts of the individuals named. By example, the September 24th, 1947 memorandum from Truman to Forrestal, that was the 9th page that was attached to the 8th-page Eisenhower briefing document, was confirmed by the Truman Library in that was the one day, September 24th, in the entire second half of 1947, that the President met privately with just James Forrestal and Dr. Vannevar Bush, and who is again the President's chief science advisor and a key member of MJ-12. Truman's appointment calendar also very uncharacteristically does not state the subject of that meeting. This is hardly a smoking gun, but when you do basic research, these things add up. Immediately following the tragedy, the Times assigned the lead article to features reporter Walter F. Wagoner. He established the following within hours of Forrestal's plunge, and I'm quoting here from the coverage by this very distinguished reporter the day after James Forrestal's death. There were indications that Mr. Forrestal might also have tried to hang himself. The sash of his dressing gown was still knotted and wrapped tightly around his neck when he was found, but hospital officials would not speculate as to its purpose. Mr. Forrestal had copied most of the Sophocles poem from the book on hospital... there were also indications that Mr. Forrestal... No, I'm not sorry. Continuing along. Mr. Forrestal had copied most of the Sophocles poem from the book on hospital memo paper, but he had apparently been interrupted in his efforts. His copying stopped after he had written night of the word nightingale. Now stop for a moment here and just stick with your human logic. What does that suggest to you? I mean, not to be crude, but either this man had to take a very wicked leak, so much so that he stopped mid-word, or that he was disturbed. Somebody said Mr. Forrestal or something, and he stopped writing. And this is the very last line of that feature front page article. Quote, "On the windowsill from which Mr. Forrestal jumped were marks suggesting he might have changed his mind and tried to climb back in the window. Bluntly put, the outside window ledge, which was a wooden ledge, was covered with fingernail scratch marks." As for the theory that Forrestal tried to hang himself, but out of a 16th floor window, subsequent investigation, number one, established that the free end of his bathrobe sash had never been tied to the radiator. This meant that he would have had to have knotted the sash around his own neck and tightly, then thrown himself from the window, but of course he changed his mind, tried to get back in, or that one or more individuals tied the sash around his neck for him and then assisted him out of the window.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Story of a CIA whistleblower regarding the UFO ET question. Stargate Productions became aware of this whistleblower in 1997. During the intervening years, Stargate Productions has vetted the Principal Stein and his family and found his story to be absolutely true. Agent Stein entered the U.S. Army from a farm community in 1956. His intelligence brought him a plum job with the Army Signal Corps as a cryptographer. In fact, he was so accomplished at his work, the Army made him an instructor for the entire course. He was assigned to a base in the eastern part of the United States. While teaching, he became friends with the Army base commander. After observing Stein for a year, the commander asked Stein if he would like to make some extra money doing an additional type of work. As it turns out, the commander was also the station chief for the CIA located at the same base. As is often the case in the CIA, the case officers wear multiple hats to the general public. Stein agreed to be recruited into the CIA while still drawing an additional paycheck from the U.S. Army. The commander, Stein calls him his boss, explained they would be investigating the United States Air Force's Project Blue Book. It was a public relations disinformation campaign from the very beginning. Stein, in his new position, was tasked with examining the Air Force's secret real UFO files that were channeled through Fort Belvoir, Maryland. They found many of the secret documented reports of UFOs and aliens from first-hand witnesses to be true. One day in 1958, his boss, CIA station chief, came to him and said they were going to upgrade his security clearances to prepare Stein for a duty in the intelligence network of the White House. Stein and his boss were to brief both President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon on what they had uncovered dealing with the UFO situation. President Eisenhower tasked the two of them to be his envoy to Area 51S4. Ike knew he was not getting the true information about what was going on at this most secret base. Stein and his boss found out that the base was under the control of what was called MJ-12. While at Area 51S4 compound, the two agents were shown a live alien, an autopsy film of another alien being dissected, along with various types of saucer-shaped craft. Some of them, they were told, were of German origin. After reporting back to the president, they were charged with going back to Area 51 and demanding the personnel in control must come to Washington immediately or face the wrath of the president, who threatened to send in the First Army from Colorado to take control of the base no matter what classified information was stored there. Stein faced serious health concerns. Therefore, it was determined to conduct this most remarkable videotaped interview on March 5, 2013, with longtime UFO researcher and author Mr. Richard Dolan. Due to death threats, Stargate Productions gave Stein and his family assurances his real name would never be divulged until after his death. Implications. The testimony you're about to watch has such broad and earth-shattering implications, it was decided to make available to the public a companion video which expands the various statements by CIA agent Stein in depth. In this interview, Stein's health was obviously failing. We were not able to explore the previous testimony he had given Stargate Productions that are outlined in the book Area 51 Whistleblowers. The companion video entitled Corroborations of CIA Agent Stein's Testimony will be led by longtime scientific consultant to Stargate Productions, author, historian, Dr. J.J. Hurtak, founder of the Future Science Foundation.
As we get older and older, I'm 77 right now. You can't live forever, you know. So if this procedure I'm going to have to clean the blood doesn't work, then I've got probably a few more months to make it before my kidneys shut down, you know. So that's kind of why I'm kind of going along with the interview at this time.
You're seeing that what you went through is just too important for people not to know about.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just, can we start at the beginning with your military career and just walk through what exactly your experiences were?
Was drafted into the military and got into the U.S. Army. After that, I was sent to the Signal Training Center in eastern United States.
What year would this be?
58. I went through the Signal Training course, and at that time, I went through the radio teletype course and also the cryptography course, crypto. They had 5 instructors that were getting out of military service. So they pulled the top 5 students, and I was 3rd in the class. So I got pulled as an instructor.
Now, were you at this time also working yet for CIA?
No.
Not yet?
No, and then I was teaching there, teaching cryptography. I already had a top secret security clearance. So, after one day, my boss came to me and he said, how would you like to, make some extra money? And I said, well, money is good. So he explained to me that he could put it through, but I have to get a top secret White House Q clearance for the job, And I thought, boy, must be a pretty exclusive thing, And I said, well, what is this? And he said that I'm director for the CIA for Eastern United States, And I said, oh, I didn't know that. And he said, you weren't supposed to. So, real nice fellow. He worked in World War II. He worked for the OSS. And he was one of the U.S. people that worked on the invention of radar for plane-to-plane use, and worked with the British on that. And very sharp fellow. And so after about 6 weeks, my security clearance came through, and I know they checked with my high school teachers and everybody. They couldn't figure out what in the world was happening. So I finally got the clearance, and I got my CIA card. It was an ID card, like a credit card, where I could just go up to the door and slice it, walk right in.
Did it say CIA on it? Central Intelligence
No, it
Agency?
didn't.
I wouldn't think so.
It
Right?
had my name at that time. I used an artificial name too. Never used my real name. So, and he had a select name that he used. But that was quite a deal. We could walk into Fort Knox or walk into any secure place, and use my car and walk right in.
That had to be kind of a nice feeling.
Yeah, kind of a powerful feeling. But that's how I got into it. And then when we got back to my, at that time I was through with the class I had. Instead of picking up a new class, I started working with him on the project he was on. And that was, Project Blue Book was going, which was kind of partially a fraud. But some of the cases that they found to be kind of accurate or couldn't put down, they sent to a base in Maryland.
Well, now when, Blue Book, of course, was the Air Force's official UFO investigation, but you're saying it's a fraud.
It was kind of a fraud. Some of it was kind of a fraud, yeah.
Why do you say that?
It was because some of the people some of the cases they had, somebody just made up. They weren't even real people.
You're saying some of the Blue Book cases were completely fictitious?
Yes.
So they would create a case and then it would be solved?
Yes.
Like that? That's it, really?
Yes. It was, but the cases that we got came from, I think it was Fort Belvoir, Maryland.
Mm-hmm. Fort Belvoir?
Yeah. And it didn't come from the Pentagon, or it didn't come from CIA headquarters. But we would get reports about a certain sighting that they had in Mexico or Italy or something like that. And then we had people that would follow through on it, that would go out and interview the people to see if they were nutcases or if it was real.
So they'd be going overseas frequently?
I wasn't, but I always stayed statewide. But the people we had working with us from the CIA would do that.
Mm-hmm.
I know they went to Italy on one case where they saw the saucer land and little greys get out, and they were shoveling up like little plants, vegetation, and so on.
What kind of evidence was obtained in that particular case?
It was film of the whole thing, that this party in Italy had filmed it. And they were taking these plants and putting them in little pots and putting them back on the saucer craft.
1950?
50, that was probably 58, yeah. Fall of 58.
Okay.
So,
if you saw the images, what actually did you see?
Well, I saw these little greys and the jobs that they were doing.
Not greys, how, like,
about
tiny?
3 to 4 feet tall. 3 feet something.
Were they called greys at the time?
No, they called them, what's the initials government came out with?
EBE.
Pardon?
EBE.
Yeah, EPDs. So, and then the craft loaded up and flew off.
Did you notice like the eyes? When we think of the greys, we've got the big black wraparound eyes. Did they have eyes like that, or did they look differently? Could you get?
No, they didn't have big wraparound eyes. I guess there are different types of greys and so on, and just like the Roswell gray. Well, they're not grays. The Roswell aliens looked just like about an 8-year-old boy. They had proper eyes, proper ears, proper nose. They looked just like little miniature boys,
How did you see that evidence?
Well, at the later on at S4, we viewed the autopsy film. And in the autopsy film, I saw these particular aliens, but they didn't look oriental, or they didn't look like the Greys and all the pictures you see.
Well, I should let you go through the rest of this story. I don't want to interrupt the flow. So you're looking at evidence from Italy and elsewhere in the world.
And Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would analyze that, and when we'd send people out, they would come back with a report, interviews of a report of whatever they saw, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing because, say, why in the world would the aliens be collecting earthly specimens?
Mm-hmm.
There was a reason for that. It's because when they flew back to the Pleiades binary star system, there's 2 Earth-like planets on at least part of one of the Earth-like planets. They may have one like a continent or something like that they've got all the vegetation from the age of the dinosaurs.
Now, how's all this known to you guys?
I learned this later on when I was at S4 from reading the interviews. Otherwise, I would never know it, you know.
When you were prepared for the first time that aliens were real, I mean, that's a very big thing for anyone to deal with. How did they prepare you for that information?
Yeah, I was coming into the Army fresh off the farm, you know, so I really didn't have much knowledge of anything, but my boss filled me in on Project Blue Book and what they had found so far, as far as Greys and aliens and the Roswell incident.
How did you feel when this first got dumped on you? When you first learned about this?
I was just kind of overwhelmed with all of this, you know. I said to him, I don't know if I'm going to be able to be a judge of this type of thing. What's real, what's not, when I don't have much knowledge of it, you know. So...
What did he say?
He said, well, we have to build the information as we go, and you'll see how this thing is working out.
And then the other thing is, of course, you really weren't able to tell family or close friends, obviously.
No, I couldn't tell anybody. In fact, I had to take a vow that I wouldn't tell anybody. A lot of it for 40 years, and more of it for 50 years, which is up in 2010. So I couldn't tell a soul. And they used to ask me when I would go home, what are you doing? I said, teaching a class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
So, teaching cryptography. Of course, the farming community, nobody knew what cryptography was. So I had to go in a long explanation of that.
I didn't notice this in any of the notes when I was reviewing it, but if you're doing cryptography, were you dealing with the National Security Agency?
We did, yes.
But you weren't part of that at all?
No. No, it wasn't part of that. But, so, eventually we got more and more into the aspect of trying to trace down some of these reports that we got. We would get like a new report probably a couple times a week.
Reports would be like sightings of a UFO?
Yeah.
Military type reports?
What the military thought was actual, as far as they interviewed people too, and they thought some were just wackos, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the ones that they, like the police chief in town or something like that, they knew was authentic. So
Was this a real issue for CIA or any of the analysts to separate out hoaxes, which there were, from the genuine sightings, I would think?
yeah, oh yeah, we had photography specialists that worked and ended up with flying saucers that were garbage can covers, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. But then others that were not.
Yeah.
Now, when is it true that when jets would be intercepted to investigate, be scrambled to investigate or intercept, were there many of these types of cases?
Yes, a lot of them.
What would typically happen?
They would get fairly close to the saucer craft, and all of a sudden they would just speed away, or it would do a loop around and end up behind them instead of them being in front. So, I mean, the maneuvering ability was unbelievable in the craft. Of course, later on we know that they used Halo technology for guidance system. And the Halo guidance system was a band that would go over the alien's head. And they could, by thought waves, they could fly the vehicle. They didn't have to use a rudder or steering wheel or anything. Fly it by thought.
Yeah, extraordinary.
So all the re-engineering and things that we've done, we've always got dual controls. We've always got manual Stecker steering wheel, and we always have Halo control in case it's flown by aliens, you know.
You're saying when we reverse engineer it.
Yes.
So the black budget clandestine programs that make these craft have the ability to have
yes.
mind-machine connection interface somehow?
Oh, yes.
We've been able to do that.
We've been able to do that, but it doesn't work on human beings. We can't use it. It doesn't do a thing but give us a headache.
When did they start trying to do that, to create that technology?
Oh my. I would say the mid-1950s.
That early?
That early. And they worked on that. So we have that technology right now.
Let's go back, and we'll get back up to S4, because I'm interested in how that whole thing transpired. So you're doing all this crypto work, you're looking at images, photographs, video. It's 1958, maybe the fall of 58. What happened after this?
Eventually, we kind of got caught up, and I took some more classes again, but I had to teach, instead of American troops, I had to teach NATO officers that were going to be in their Signal Corps. So I got groups of Germans, French, Italians, those from the Netherlands, and Norway and Sweden troops. And I taught that. So that went on for about a year. And then I got to the kind of the finishing point on that. And then I had about 4 months left.
So we're in 1959 at this
Yeah,
point?
1959. I had about 4 months left of my military sign-up, so they brought me back, and they didn't know what to do with my boss or myself, because he was kind of through with at that time, the Project Blue Book thing kind of went pop, you know. If you remember, back in those days, they kind of declared it as a nothing, you know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
they were telling the world all UFOs are misidentifications, hoaxes,
balloons,
psychological issues, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they brought both of us into Washington. At first we were at the old headquarters for CIA.
Okay.
And later on, my boss came to me and he says, "We've both got a new assignment." And he said, "Oh," I said, "Where are we going?" "Oh," he says, "Going to the Capitol. I'm going to be part of the Eisenhower push." He's trying to find out something all about these aliens that MJ-12 was supposed to find out, but never sent back reports to him.
MJ-12, the UFO control group, were they calling it MJ-12 at that time? Yes.
And so they said, they called us in, went into the Oval Office, and President Eisenhower was there, and Nixon, and they said, "We've got, we called the people in from MJ-12 from Area 51 and S4, but they told us that the government had no jurisdiction over what they were doing, that they had complete control over what was happening there and so on."
Who had complete control?
The MJ-12.
Oh, over the president.
Yes, that the president had nothing to do with it.
So Eisenhower was out of the loop
So
on that whole matter?
Yeah, so being a past general, you didn't tell him to go to hell without any real good reason, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, "I want you and your boss to fly out there. I want you to give them a personal message." He says, "I want you to tell them, whoever is in charge, tell them that to get in, they have this coming week, to get into Washington and to report to me. And if they don't, I'm going to get the 1st Army from Colorado, and we're going to go over, we're going to take the base over. I don't care what kind of classified material you got. We're going to rip this thing apart."
Eisenhower was going to invade Area 51.
Yeah, with the 1st Army. So
Unless what? Unless he got information about what was going on?
Unless they came in to talk to him. But the information they gave him was all bogus, you know. But that's how we got out there the first time we went out.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Matrix TV. And the dumbing down of America stops here.
Coming up in a few minutes is first-time guest Ron Garner. Ron is a documentary filmmaker and co-owner of the original UFO Enigma Museum in Roswell, New Mexico.
If everybody here has seen Bob Lazar's poster, that's the closest thing you'll see until you see the real one of a flying disc. Anyway, there's also some question on grays, and you noticed, you know, I see all these various different suits and all that. They wore a shirt and a pair of pants. Their shoes were a little different, but then I just did this about 3 weeks ago. This guy's name is J-Rod. Imagine that, J-A-R-O-D. That's a translation for whatever, you know, they had given the translators at the facility that I worked at. There's a lot of linguists. There's so many people involved in this whole particular project. It's just insurmountable. One of the things I wanted to say and bring out, that the reason why everybody talks about the government's not going to do this, the government's not going to do that. Well, let me tell you guys something. That's the government you know. There are little countries in this country. You got one not so far from here. It's part of Area 51, but a portion of that facility is a separate country, and that is not the government. That's a separate entity in its own.
Okay, we're back with Ron. Listen, we just aired this clip from this Bill Uhouse, and you mentioned him earlier on in the interview, but what did he do? What did he exactly do? Was he at Area 51 or only in New Mexico?
Oh, no, he was at Area 51.
Oh.
And I'd interviewed his son, Will Uhouse, for 4 hours. And Bill just passed away May of last year. And I'm told that his son got a cache of information from his father that he will share at the right time. Well, Bill Uhouse, I first met him at a conference, UFO conference in Las Vegas in '93, and then other people that I know interviewed him. I have about 3 or 4 hours of video and audio of him. You played some of it there. But he was a Marine pilot in World War II. Then he worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and then they recruited him
And they wanted us to get
to work with the extraterrestrial people. And he tells in my video how, and this is just pure logic, that he was tested to see if he could deal with working with extraterrestrial people. A lot of people can't. And that's another big story that ufology doesn't understand, that one of the reasons for disclosure is the ET people are fed up with talking to second and third tier people. The really sharp scientists, Dan's an exception, but the really sharp scientists are not going to work in those conditions of secrecy.
Yeah.
And no matter how much they get paid. So Bill Uhouse, they tested him, and he passed the test with flying colors. He says it on my video. So he was able to work with the extraterrestrial. And the extraterrestrial was an engineer. He was, when they were building the simulator to teach our pilots how to fly the UFOs, Bill Uhouse would ask the ET scientist, where does this go? What's the calculation? And the ET person, the engineer ET person, would say, no, do it this way and do it that way.
Amazing. That is just too incredible. What really got me about Bill's clip was that he says there are separate countries.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
Within the country. What does that mean?
You mean within our country?
Well, in our country, at Area 51, it's a separate country. It's just like an Indian reservation.
Oh, okay.
They don't go by our laws. That's why the president can't go there. That's why in the movie Independence Day, I don't know if you knew the backstory on Independence Day, when they first talked to the military and Air Force about doing, oh yeah, we'll help you. But when they said they were going to have Area 51, the Army cut everything, so the people that made Independence Day had to use National Guard troops instead of the Army. They wouldn't cooperate because that's super secret, Area 51. That's why my site, Area 51 Disclosure, is so important, because I'm going to explore all these things that nobody knows about.
So you're saying that Area 51...
I'm still here and still standing, and you guys will know a lot more than anybody else.
Ron, so you're saying that Area 51 is a separate country within the United States?
Part of it is, and that's why they can get away with. That's why they can get away with burning waste and doing testing. That's probably why.
The supposed members of this elite panel were 12 of the most trusted and brilliant men from the military, scientific, and intelligence communities. Friedman believes that Truman and his close advisors selected them, and the 12 men had the highest security clearance. It is an impressive group: the Secretary of Defense, the first 3 directors of the CIA, an Air Force general who would later become head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of the Army, and 5 of the nation's leading scientists at the time.
One characteristic was clear. They all had worked on very high security stuff.
So you go out with your superior.
Yes.
You fly out. You land. What happens? Can you describe this whole process? What you saw?
Well, we landed at the air base in Nevada. Was it Nellis? Yes. And then we went by a small computer plane, like up to Area 51. and we landed there. And then, instead of taking,
Did you see anything in Area 51 while you were there?
just a runway,
That's it. Okay.
but then it took us by a van, like a small school bus.
Mm-hmm.
They held about 15, 18 passengers. They took us the 13 or 15 miles south to S4.
Now, were you with only your superior officer, or were there other people with you?
There were other people. There was a colonel that was in charge,
Mm-hmm.
and he had his first name on his name tag,
Just first name.
which they never do, But I can't think of what it is right now. It's in that report,
Mm-hmm.
that I filled out. But anyway, we got down there, and he said that we told him we had a message from President Eisenhower, and we were going to talk to whoever was in charge. And well, he said that right now that would be me, because the other two guys are at a meeting at the Bohemian, whatever it is,
Bohemian Grove?
Grove in California. They had some kind of an annual meeting there.
Yes.
So
That's a notorious kind of masters of the universe get together at Bohemian Grove, and it's like almost like a Bilderberg type of a thing.
Yeah.
And they were doing that in 59. They
Yes.
telling me this.
But so we talked to him. We told him that President Eisenhower told us that they had better come in next week to Washington. So he had to call him at Bohemian Grove and tell him to get to Washington, where Eisenhower was coming with troops. So he asked me, do you think Eisenhower will really do this? And I said, you can bet on it. I said, he's going to be standing right in your doorstep. I said, he will be here. I said, nobody tells a former general to go to pot, without the guy coming and getting revenge.
This is an incredible level of disrespect.
Yes.
Showing the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces,
Right.
a 5-star general,
Right.
hero of World War II, and they're just ignoring him as if he doesn't matter.
So they went to Washington, but gave him the usual spiel on what they were doing as far as the black program. And that
What was the usual spiel?
at that time, they, of course, invented the U-2.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, they had the Blackbird on the drawing boards. And they had models of it. And the Blackbird they had was a Series 1, a model, because it had regular round fuselage, didn't have the flat bottom to ride on its own sound waves. So I know it wasn't a hypersonic job.
Okay.
So later on, a couple of years later, they come out with the real SR-71.
Yeah.
But that was the two things that they did.
So meanwhile, you're at Area 51. You've got the colonel there. You told him all of this about Eisenhower. What happened after this?
Well, they did, of course. After this, they went and showed us the base.
Mm-hmm.
S4. Now, Area 51 has got like a large building where the whole floor goes down. But at that time, there was no basement. There was nothing. It had Area 51. But S4 had, like, right along the edge of the mountains, had, like, different garage door openings.
Okay.
And in these garage door openings, they had, like, different saucer crafts. The very first one had the Roswell craft.
What did it look like?
It looked real shiny. And
Did you get an idea about how large it was?
Probably it was not a saucer craft as far as being round. It was like a shape of a spade shovel with a pointed front, with two rears to it, with two vertical stabilizers.
You ever see the image that Kenneth Arnold showed of the flying discs that he saw in 1947? There was sort of like a crescent. Was it like that?
It was a little bit different than that.
Okay.
It was probably a phase 2 saucer craft. But
was it damaged at all, or was it intact as far as you could tell?
Damaged on the starboard side. It was kind of crashed up. But apparently every alien that was in it died except for a couple.
Okay.
Except for 2. One was scrambling up the little embankment out of the gorge that it was in, and some stupid soldier shot it. So one was dead, and of course the other ones were dead.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all, bodies were brought back put on a pallet and brought back to the airbase at Roswell, and were kind of examined there, brought into a local clinic and examined by some doctors they had there, and some nurse that they had was real mouthy, and she wouldn't keep it a secret, wasn't going to keep it a secret.
Was this something you knew at the time?
Yes.
You were briefed on this in some way?
Yeah, I was briefed on this by one alien he interviewed that survived.
All right, well, we're going to come up to that, I think. Right, we're about there. So right now you're looking at the craft.
Yes.
As you're, I guess, really entering the facility, just about.
Yeah.
So you see the Roswell craft, and what are some of the others that you see?
Well, the Roswell craft was really strange because it looked like real heavy aluminum foil. We could rock next to it, and you could rock it. The whole thing probably weighed 150, 300 pounds.
Yeah, that's it?
That's it. And they had tried to Colonel said they tried to reverse engineer the power on that one, and they couldn't do it because the entire craft was tied up in like a guidance system. And the uniforms that the little aliens had on were tied into the system, and without those aliens being active and so on, they couldn't manifest. They couldn't get this thing to operate.
Could they tell what the source of power was of this craft?
Yeah, it was like a reverse gravitational thing of some kind.
Okay.
But in fact, later on, I got the mathematical code for reversing gravity in a 3x5 card. And I used to carry it around in my pocket.
How did you get that?
I got it from S4. When I was going through the thing, they had some copies, so I just took one.
Wow, that's taking a bit of a chance.
Yeah, but at that time, they really didn't watch like we were doing real close. But I read, at that time, let's get back to the crafts.
Yes.
I saw, and on the second garage thing opening, I saw old German crafts, Rendezvous 1 and 2s. I knew from what my boss had told me about the Rendezvous 1 and 2, what they were. And of course, he was right there with me, you know.
And what did your boss tell you, or what did you learn about the history of the Haunebu craft? When were they made? How operational were they?
The first one was made in 27, I believe.
27.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the Germans developed a reverse gravitational power plant, and they built one. They were trying to design this. They couldn't. And they had this woman who was a medium, and she went into some kind of a trance, and she wrote down all the mathematical equations for reversing gravity. And that's how the Germans got it actually from an alien.
So essentially they got it through a kind of clairvoyant connection
Yes.
to an alien intelligence.
Yes, that's how they got it.
Now, were these operational during World War II, as far as you learned?
Yes.
Where were they used?
They, unfortunately, Hitler didn't want to use them to a great deal, shoot down our crafts and stuff.
I mean, the obvious question would be, why not? This is an incredible weapon.
Yes, because he didn't want to lose them. At that time, when they really, 44, 45, 43, when they came out with them, they didn't want to lose them because he already thought he was losing the war, and that
That they would not make enough of a difference?
that he would use it. They would use them for World War III and not World War II.
At his headquarters in Wewelsburg Castle, SS Commander Heinrich Himmler brought in psychics and mediums who claimed they could contact extraterrestrial beings. One of these was an influential member of the Vril Society named Maria Orsic.
Maria Orsic headed a group of women known as the Vrilikin, or the female Vril members, and they were beautiful women. They grew their hair very long because they felt like their long hair could act as an antenna to the universal Vril energy.
They believed that extraterrestrials, non-human force, was right here on planet Earth. And they were the ones who inspired the early technology to develop circular-shaped craft based on images that they'd seen of flying saucers. They inspired Schaumburger. They inspired other developers to look into the possibility that these disc-shaped craft could fly through some sort of anti-gravity, some sort of levitation. The Germans were able to develop a technology so far in advance of the Allied technology that people said they were helped by extraterrestrials. In fact, the one quote we have was from Hermann Oberth. And Dr. Oberth was in the German rocketry program. Hermann Oberth said, quote, "We were helped by people from other worlds."
So he spared. He had saucer crafts. He had all different types of. He had a craft that was. It was like a ball of light, and it would fly through the air and fly next to your aircraft, and all your instruments would go wild.
Yeah, they were the Foo Fighters.
Foo Fighters.
So those were German creation, as far as what you learned?
Yes.
I was a fighter pilot in World War II. I served a career of 24 years as a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force. But I was a young fighter pilot in World War II, and I was a captain in the Air Force near the end of the war. And we began receiving reports sometime in 1943 of Foo Fighters, fireball fighters. They were balls of brilliant light, sometimes brilliant green and sometimes brilliant orange light, sometimes the size of a basketball and sometimes much bigger, that would get in formation with our bombers and stay there. Nothing, you couldn't shoot them down. You couldn't no matter what maneuver we went through, they stayed exactly in position. I had friends who reported these balls of fire appearing outside of the cockpit of a fighter aircraft only 10 and 15 feet away, and they did every maneuver they could think of, dives and rolls and everything, trying to get rid of this ball of fire out there, and it remained in exactly the same position no matter what they did. This represented a technology far superior to anything that we had encountered anywhere on the planet before. We thought these objects were being manufactured by the German government because they were our opposition at the time, and we thought they had discovered some new technique because we had already experienced other instruments, other vehicles that passed through the bomber formations at very high speed that also had glowing tails. We had close approaches of disc-shaped craft, not as close as one would like, but following bomber formations. We knew that the rockets had been perfected, and we thought that most of these were simply a further extension of this rocket technology, and we believed that they were all being produced someplace by the Germans.
So, I just have one question about the Haunebu craft. If it was the first, was it conceived in 1927 or built? I only ask because that's actually before Hitler even took power, many years before, when Germany was still under the Versailles peace treaty stipulations and all that.
It was designed and they built one at that time in 27.
In complete secrecy, I assume.
Oh, yeah.
And was all this information given to you verbally or in briefings or learned after your work there?
Yeah.
Basically, I learned most of it from reading the different interviews, things that they had with all the aliens that they had at that time.
On base, you read these?
Yes.
Okay, so this is all during your time of work on base?
Yes.
Okay.
Because these German crafts, and later on in here, they had a triangular craft.
The Germans did?
No, that was an American version.
Americans created a triangle craft back in the 50s?
Yes. It was a small thing.
Can I ask you, I hate to interrupt you, when you're reviewing the various reports of flying saucers while doing your job, did you have a sense of, this one's German, this one's alien, and how much of one were you getting as opposed to the other, and where were the German ones, if you were tracking those, where were they coming from, and so on?
Well, the Black Project had picked up, or the Men in Black had picked up these German rendezvous, and they got them from someplace in South America where they had crashed or wouldn't fly anymore or something. And they brought them back up by boat. And this Brill Corporation that you had mentioned was very active in Germany during the First World War. And in fact, my grandfather was a member of it.
Of the Vril Society?
Yes.
A little-known occult group may have been an inspiration for one of the most terrifying ideologies of the 20th century. It formed a dark fellowship that was established nearly 100 years ago. It seems that its original members believed that they could live below the Earth's surface and fly to distant stars. Their power would be a mysterious substance called Vril. They also believed that one day they would take over the world. They came very close. The mysterious group claimed influence in the highest ranks of the German power structure of the 1930s. This dark fellowship may have been a Nazi cult. The stories of history's dark fellowships strike fear into many hearts. But what are the truths behind the stories? Throughout history, there have been secret organizations striving for influence in political circles. But if the bizarre legends about the Vril Society are true, the organization is particularly unsettling.
The Vril Society is the most mysterious German secret society ever in history. They were originally founded before the Second World War, and their influence reaches out even till today.